McDonnell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I suppose I should deal straightforwardly with the issue of the U-turn. Yes, 2 weeks ago I recommended that Labour MPs should vote for the Charter, and today I'll be urging them to vote against. Embarrassing. 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 Embarrassing, yes, of course it is. But a bit of humility amongst politicians never goes amiss. When the circumstances and judgments change, it's best to admit to it and change as well. So I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome the Prime Minister's change of heart on the bid for the Saudi President's contract. Let me be clear, though. I've changed my mind not on the principles of the need to tackle the deficit, but on the parliamentary tactics for dealing with this Charter. Labour will tackle the deficit. The Chancellor... let me give some room in a sense. The Chancellor has a record of ignoring the targets he's set in these charters and mandates, treating his own charter with contempt. So I recommended 2 weeks ago we should do the same. It's difficult to take seriously the charters and mandates when time after time the Chancellor has come to Parliament to revise his own charter. It's difficult to take it seriously when he's failed to meet his own targets consistently. I remember the promises. I was here. The Chancellor promised to wipe out the deficit in one Parliament. He didn't get through half. In 2010, he promised to reduce borrowing to £37 billion by 2014 to 2015. Last year, it was £87 billion, 135% more than forecast. He promised public sector net debt would fall to 69% of GDP in 2014-15. Today, it's at 80% and above. It's no wonder that the Charter has been seen as one of those puerile political traps the Chancellor likes to set. Vote against the... I will in due course. Let me make some room. Vote against the Charter and you're a deficit denier. Vote for it, and for the next 5 years you will claim you've signed up to support every one of his cuts in public services and in benefits. I regret that the procedure followed today is an unamendable order, a take-it-or-leave-it order. My initial view was to use today's debate for a bit of traditional parliamentary knockabout to ridicule the performance of the Chancellor against his own charter. I admit it, I was trying to out-Osborne Osborne. Apart from the economic analysis and professional advice I've received, what really changed my mind was a trip to Redcar last week, where I met steel workers and their families in tears at losing their jobs, their livelihoods, their futures. The failure of the government to invest in our manufacturing industry, if only to mothball the plant until better times arrive, has meant the end of steel making in Teesside and immense distress to families. That refusal to allow government to invest will be embedded in this Charter as it now moves on to limit all public sector borrowing. I will.
I'm grateful to the Shadow Chancellor for giving way, because according to Hansard, during the last Parliament, there were over 100 occasions when the Shadow Chancellor criticised both government and other organisations for failing to consult sufficiently. Does he not now understand the irony of that, given his complete failure to consult with his own colleagues over this position?
In the Labour Party, we have a democratic process that the Shadow Cabinet and the Parliamentary Labour Party. In fact, it's so democratic it's reported in the press virtually on a daily basis. The more we know, this Charter will be used in time and time again as an excuse for the government's refusal to intervene and refusal to invest. The more we know about the potential use of this Charter, the more my view is strengthened that it has to be vigorously opposed. It will be used to justify cutting services and support to families across the UK, including the cuts to tax credits, the working families penalty. I cannot support the cuts to tax credits for working families. These are people who've done everything asked of them. They've gone to work, they've looked after their children, yet they're going to be hit with a £1,300 cut because of the policy direction in this charter. I also cannot support the continuing attack on disabled people inherent in this fiscal mandate. I will in a minute. Disabled people already harassed, some to death, by the brutal work capability assessment and often benefit sanctions are to lose over £30 a week. Disabled people under this government and our coalition have been hit 18 times harder by the impact of cuts under the coalition than other citizens. I do not want the Labour Party associated in any way with these policies, and to disassociate ourselves clearly, we need to vote against tonight.
Everybody understands the views of the honourable gentleman, but what he has to explain to the House is what circumstances have changed in the last 2 weeks. There has to be some element of consistency, of trust in the opposition, that in future he won't be blown off course so easily.
Clearly the honourable gentleman wasn't listening. It was professional advice. It was watching the crowd, watching the economic headwinds grow. But in addition to that, it was meeting families who'd lost their futures in Redcar that decided that we need a government that will invest and not leave them dry. This debate, I will in due course. It is increasingly clear that the Charter and the fiscal mandate are not economic instruments, they're political weapons. This debate is not an economic debate. It's about the politics of dismantling the welfare state, the closing down of the role of the state and the redistribution of wealth from the majority to the minority. Austerity is not an economic necessity. It's a political choice. The focus of the economic debate of the last 5 years on the deficit, certainly I will.
For the honourable gentleman for giving way, but he said at the beginning of his speech that he wanted to reduce the deficit, and whenever any cut is proposed, he is against it. So what would he cut? What would he do to get the books balanced?
If the honourable gentleman bears with me, he'll discover. He's renowned for his patience. Bear with me. No, I just want to press on. It's a limited debate, so we need to press on. The focus of the economic debate of the last 5 years on the deficit reflects the capture of an economic narrative by the right since the crisis in 2008. Over 6 years now, the Conservatives have managed to convince many people that the economic crisis and deficit were caused by Labour government spending. It's been one of the most successful exercises in mass public persuasion and the rewriting of history in recent times. Today I'm going to correct the record. The facts speak for themselves. The Conservatives backed every single penny of Labour's spending until Northern Rock crashed. The average level of spending under Labour was less than under Mrs Thatcher. It wasn't the teachers, the nurses, the doctors, the police officers that Labour recruited that caused the economic crisis. It was the recklessness of the bankers speculating the city and the failure of successive governments to ensure effective regulation. And in opposition, this Chancellor and his colleagues wanted even less regulation of the banking sector, which crashed our economy. The deficit was not the cause of the economic crisis, but the result of the economic crisis. Focusing on the deficit continues to mask the underlying weaknesses and failures of our unreformed economic system. I'll give way.
What happened under the last government was the Chancellor and his regulatory authorities allowed first the dot-com bubble and then the crazy credit boom. That meant tax revenues temporarily soared to astonishing levels. The then Labour government carried on running a deficit on top of those tax revenues, and then the revenues collapsed and left us with the worst annual deficit in the G20. The last government was complicit in the consequences of 2000.
And when that expenditure And when that expenditure was being determined in this House, this side supported it, never objected. The honourable gentleman may well have rejected it, but I remember his budgets. His budgets balanced, but when they balanced, there were 40,000 homeless families in London. People were dying on waiting lists before they got their operation. That's the consequences of his economic policies. We're focusing on the deficit continues to mask the underlying weaknesses and failures of our unreformed economic system. We are witnessing a recovery based upon rising house prices, growing consumer credit, a ballooning current account deficit, and still inadequate reform of the finance sector. I worry that some of the warning signs are reappearing. But the Conservatives have adhered to the dictum: never let a crisis go to waste. They've skillfully used the narrative of the deficit to enable them to cut public services and slash benefits and to give tax cuts to the rich and corporations. Successive charters and fiscal mandates brought before this House have been cynically used as a weapon in that cause. The purpose of the original Fiscal Reform Act, brought in by Labour in 2009, was to bolster the government's economic credibility. I recall what the current Chancellor said. He described it as little more than a political stunt. But soon he learnt what a useful tool charters and mandates can be. Immediately on the coalition's election, he introduced his own. The fact he missed most of his targets was irrelevant to him. What was more valuable was the charters could be picked up whenever needed and prayed in aid to excuse any attack on the welfare state, any cut in benefits, and provide a means to redistribute wealth upwards. The charter before us today also has little basis in economics. Let me quote Dr. Harjun Chang, Professor Thomas Piketty, Professor David Blanchflower, Mariana Mazzucato, Simon and Lewis, eminent economists in our society. They said this: it has no basis in economics. Osborne's proposals are not fit for the complexity of a modern 21st century economy, and as such, they risk a liquidity crisis that could also trigger banking problems, a fall in GDP, a crash, or all three. They go on to say if the government chooses to try to inflexibly run surpluses, households, consumers and businesses may have to borrow more overall. And the risk of a personal debt crisis to rival 2008 could be very real indeed.
What they've got in Canada.
Yes, I will.
I appreciate him giving way. The wording of this charter has not changed in the last 2 weeks. And I am therefore curious, what happened 2 weeks ago? Was it that he read the charter and did not understand it? Or was that he had not read the charter when he advised his colleagues to vote on it?
Can I just say to the honourable gentleman, it is always best, before making an intervention, to have listened to the debate so far. And it's always best to make a calculation whether he's going to add to the sum of human knowledge by the intervention. The Chancellor... All right, I was a bit harsh. Sorry about that. Mr. Speaker, I'm not usually so I'm diplomatic, am I? Can I press on? Can I press on? The Chancellor may not appreciate the economic points that have been made, but I believe... Certainly.
I'd like to make the point which I think my learned friend was making, or even my honourable friend. If there was no basis for this measure, why did he agree to it 2 weeks ago?
Can I say this? Can I apologise to the Honourable? I was too harsh, and I certainly don't want to be with the Honourable Lady. But if she could just keep up, it would be really helpful. All right? I've tried to reiterate 3 times. I've said it 3 times. It's...
Order. Let's have a bit of order on both sides. The nature of such a debate is the existence of strong and contrary opinions. If people insist on shouting from a sedentary position as part of a sort of group therapy, thinking they're being thinking they're being clever. Just think of what the electorate wants, which is a civilised debate, not the most juvenile badinage. John McDonnell.
I'm sorry for the honourable lady for being so ungallant. I apologise for that. But I have explained 3 times already. Okay.
Thank you. I'm grateful to my honourable friend. We're getting to the crux of this debate, which is that this fiscal charter is intellectually moronic. It essentially commits this House to never borrowing to invest, even when the cost-benefit analysis of that investment is such that the country would benefit greatly. And that is why it has not one serious economist backing it, other than the self-styled experts on the government benches.
I was going to say I could have said it better myself. Can we move on? Can we move on? Okay. The Chancellor may not appreciate these economic points, but I believe many of his advisers do. That's why there's a sizable get-out clause for the Charter rules not to apply outside normal times when there's a significant negative shock to the UK economy. Not only are the social consequences of this programme devastating, but the scale of cutbacks we are witnessing represent a false economy. They jeopardise the long-term economic prosperity of our country. To be frank, it's a false economy to cut adult social care when you shift the burden into hospital accident emergencies. It's a false economy to pursue an ideological sell-off of council housing simply to eventually put up the rents and eventually increase housing benefit. It's a false economy, ironically, when this government came into office, there were 70,000 people at HMRC, and within the next year it's planned to fall to 52,000. A cut of more than 25% in tax collecting staff, while the HMRC say tax evasion is as high as $10 billion a year. But the worst, if the honourable lady doesn't mind, I've taken a large number of interventions. It's a time-limited debate. If she has any points she'd like to raise with me, I'm happy to meet her separately or write to her. The worst false economy. I'm doing my best to be nice, Mr. Speaker. It's the new politics. It's the new politics of the Labour Party. The worst false economy is the failure to invest. This will be a direct result of government policy embedded in this charter, with its limits on all public sector borrowing. Economists from across the spectrum have written and commented on the need for investment for the future. The World Economic Forum ranks the UK 10th for the quality of our infrastructure, behind Germany, France, the Netherlands and Spain. This Chancellor's strategy has given us investment as a share of GDP lower than all the other G7 countries, falling even further behind the G7 average in recent years. That's why business leaders, trade unions and a host of others are calling for investment. It's incomprehensible for the Chancellor to rule out the government playing a role in building our future. For him to constrain himself from so doing in future, no matter what the business case for a project, has no basis in economic theory or experience. We also face uncertain medium-term future for the global economy. In recent weeks, there's been mounting evidence of a decline in global demand, particularly in the emerging markets. Economists, if you don't mind, I'll press on because we're limited on time. Economists have warned of the potential for a future slowdown in Western economies as a result. Former chief economist at the World Bank, Larry Summers, wrote last week that the dangers facing the global economy are more severe than at any time since the height of the crisis. Faced with these potential challenges, it makes no sense to close down the fiscal options available, especially when there's a possibility that monetary policy options may also be constrained. I want to break, though, the stranglehold that the focus on deficits has had on the economic debate in this country in recent years. Yes, the deficit is vitally important, but we need a paradigm shift to open up the wider debate of what makes a healthy economy, a prosperous economy in which everybody shares in that prosperity, in which everybody is secure, not just the wealthy few, where everybody has a decent home and a sustainable environment, is able to develop their talents to the full, has secure, stable, well-paid and rewarding employment and support when they fall on hard times. We'll tackle the deficit, yes, but we will not tackle... listen, you'll hear. We will not tackle the deficit on the backs of middle and low earners, and especially not on the backs of the poorest in our society. We will tackle the deficit, but we'll do it fairly and to a timescale that doesn't jeopardise our sustainable growth in our economy. We will balance day-to-day spending and invest for future growth so that the debt-to-GDP ratio falls, paying down our debts. We'll do this first by ending this government's programme of tax cuts to the wealthiest in our society. This winter, when the letters go through the letterboxes telling working families how much they'll lose in tax credits, we'll be reminding them that their tax credit cut has paid for a cut of billions of pounds in the inheritance taxes of the richest families in this country. Second, we'll give HMRC the resources and powers to tackle tax evasion and avoidance. No more Facebooks paying less than £5,000 in tax despite 35 million in bonuses and total global profits of 1.9 billion. But above all else, we'll grow our economy. We'll use smart government institutions to strategically invest in the key areas that increase GDP in the future, in education, in health, research, technology, human capital formation and training, a progressive economic agenda which recognises that wealth creation is a collective process, working in partnership with businesses, workers, public institutions and civil society organisations that create in this country. That's right. I've given away a number of times for a time-limited debate. I apologise. That's why we will establish a national investment bank to invest in innovation across the entire supply chain, from the infrastructure we need to the applied research and early-stage financing of companies. To tackle the growing skills shortages, we'll prioritise education in schools and universities with a clear strategy for construction, manufacturing and engineering skills to build and maintain sustainable economic growth. The proceeds of that growth will reach all sections of society. So we're launching the debate on the economy we need and the economic instruments and policies we need to achieve that prosperous and sustainable growth. That's why we're reviewing every aspect of economic policy and systematically assessing our economic institutions, the Bank of England, HMRC and the Treasury. Today I can announce that I've appointed former member of the Monetary Policy Committee, Professor David Blanchflower, to lead a review into whether the MPC should be given a broader mandate. He's joined by Lord McCall, the former chair of the Treasury Select Committee. This is Labour's radical project. It's based upon the sound advice of some of the best economic brains in the country. We'll be testing our policies and economic instruments, and we'll be asking the Chancellor to give us access to the resources of the OBR to model our proposals. I'm asking the same of the Governor of the Bank of England. We're seeking the widest public engagement in our economic policy discussions. The dividing lines between us and the government are not just about how we tackle the deficit and who pays for the crisis, they're more fundamental. It's for whom the economy works and the role of the strategic state in this process. So today, we will oppose this charter as an instrument for imposing austerity on our community unnecessarily. We are bringing to an end the petty game playing, and we're moving on to a more serious debate of how our economy can work for everybody.